What is up, and welcome back to Beyond the Arc with Brandon Silvers. As always, I am your host, Brandon Silvers. Hope y'all had a great week. Who Jesus Lord, it is hot and I'm sweating, but I'm going to try to overcome that and answer one of the world's most difficult questions. Is the Dan Lebatard Show with Stugotz the Kristen Bell of sports media? Okay, let me explain. If you follow me on social media, particularly Twitter, you know I'm a streaky tweeter. You might not hear from me for days outside of promoting an episode or retweeting other people, and then boom, I'll rain down a flurry of original tweets that I swear would go viral if I were more famous. There are many issues with Twitter, and it now feels like we're moments away from it being a thing of the past, but while it's still here, one thing has remained constant the entire time. The number one rule of Twitter each day is to do whatever you can to make sure you are not the main character. Of course, that can be a little bit hard to avoid because people don't know what they're putting out there that could make them the main character until it's too late, like Kristen Bell. She was the main character before in 2021 when she and her husband talked about their family showering philosophy, which is essentially waiting until they stink or there is visible dirt on their bodies. If you haven't watched Forgetting Sarah Marshall as much as I have and didn't know what Kristen Bell looked like before I told you about her aversion to showering, I'm willing to bet that you could make a pretty good guess based on that information alone. And your guess would be correct, and played a big role in why she was the main character on Twitter yet again. Our hydrophobic friend Kristen threw a dinner party. It was a star-studded affair held at Jimmy Kimmel's Idaho Lodge, and it had attendees like Kimmel, Jennifer Aniston, Jimmy Fallon, John Mulaney, Adam Scott, Courtney Cox, and a bunch of other people you probably have heard of. Kristen posted a picture of the dinner, and everyone was sitting at this long Last Supper-esque table. There were like 30 of them having the time of their lives, but Twitter quickly picked up on the fact that every person at this giant table was white. Jokes were made, think pieces were written, people rushed to her defense, basically the whole gamut of what happens when someone becomes main character of the day on Twitter. The reaction was also heightened due to Kristen's public persona. This isn't a Mitch McConnell dinner party. We'd be shocked and concerned for the well-being of any non-white invitee there. If you showed me a picture of a Mitch McConnell dinner party and it was only white people, I'd be like, oh, thank God. But Kristen positions herself as an ally. She's written children's books about accepting people who are different than you, participated in campaigns pledging to be a better ally, probably posted some black squares and stuff on Instagram, all that fun stuff. And it's not that we as black people should all aspire to go to a Kristen Bell dinner party, but if that's the public image someone is putting out, then it starts raising red flags to me because in my mind, it's either A, she didn't deem any black people worthy enough to attend her dinner party, or B, no black person felt close enough to her to accept her invitation. As someone who is a firm believer in the value of surrounding yourself with different people and how easy it is to connect with different people and how much it can facilitate your own growth to do so, I'm always very curious when people don't do this, which is what I've been wrestling with when it comes to my favorite podcast, The Dan Lebatard Show with Stugotz. For those of you who don't know, Dan Lebatard planted the seed that made me think I could become a sports media personality. I knew Dan from his guest appearances on PTI when that was appointment television for me, as well as a show that he hosted with his dad and Bomani Jones called Highly Questionable. But as much as I loved those shows, it was his radio show / podcast / TV show, The Dan Lebatard Show with Stugotz, that set me on this path. This is where they covered sports the way that I watch sports, the way I still watch sports, and now the way that I cover sports. At its best, it's kind of like watching someone play double dutch where one jump rope is serious societal issues, the other is ridiculous humor, and the ground is sports, if that makes any sense whatsoever. Before coming across that show, it had never occurred to me that there was a serious market for sports coverage like that, or that you could cover sports like that using people who look different than that traditional straight white male archetype. The main core of the show were white guys or white Cubans like Dan, except for black producer Roy Bellamy and social media extraordinaire Juju Gotti, but they bring on a whole array of ESPN talent who were underutilized on the typical ESPN shows and didn't quite look or sound the part, and they just let them do their thing. It was awesome. So awesome that when I started doing this, my goals were to eventually work for the Lebatard Show and then become the Dan Lebatard of Charleston. These both feel out of reach at the moment for similar reasons. Dan himself has very much been someone I look up to, and I was excited when he broke away from ESPN, where his relationship with the company deteriorated mostly due to his outspokenness when it came to social justice issues. They wanted him to stick to sports. He formed Meadowlark Media with former ESPN CEO John Skipper, and he proclaimed that they were going to do things differently. Now, this can mean a lot of things, but one thing I was hopeful about was that it would mean more diversity in sports coverage. Dan has spoken a lot about empowering voices. What's implied in that is that the voices previously didn't have quote unquote power, which in this industry usually means a platform. I've talked before about the Pew Research study that showed sports media is whiter with more men than every other form of journalism. This is exactly why I do my Above the Fold series on this channel, to combat that. So it didn't feel like a huge leap to think that someone who wants to empower voices and do things differently in this industry would place a premium on finding on-air talent that broke that straight, white, male traditional mold. I also assumed that because they had been so good at utilizing overlooked talent at ESPN, that the lack of diversity in their main cast was more due to ESPN budgetary constraints than choice. Freed from that at Meadowlark and setting out to do things differently, I figured that would change quickly. And it did with their first new hire in Jessica Smetana. They certainly needed a woman's voice and a younger voice, and Jess was both of those, so we could certainly forgive her for being white. However, as the hires started rolling in for the main show and the satellite shows, I started to realize that I had probably fucked up with my assumptions. Of the podcast on the network, the only black regulars who are not former athletes are Howard Bryant and Amin El Hassan, who were both well established before coming aboard. They do have a consultation deal of some kind with Jamel Hill, but she's the only black woman outside of former WNBA star Renee Montgomery. The non-black talent to me seems to have a wide range of resume strength and recognition. This is not to say they're not worthy of their job or not skilled enough, but it does feel like the black talent, particularly black women, have a higher bar to clear in order to get hired. Stop me if you've heard that before. Do I think it's intentional or malicious? No. More like a vicious cycle. You're building a business where popularity and mass appeal matter. It's in an industry like many others where it's easier to break into when you're white. There's more recognizable white talent in the recruitment pool. They're going to appeal to the majority of people since there's so many of them. It feels like a safer decision, particularly early on in your company's life when there are so many other pitfalls. It's certainly easier than trying to find the black talent that's trying to overcome all types of bullshit. Next thing you know, your organization looks like you held a job fair at a Taylor Swift concert. I can understand how easy it is for something like this to happen unintentionally with no malice involved, but it still needs to be called out. Why? Well, first of all, it hurt my feelings. It made me think that the premise under which I pursued all of this was a lie. This was the sports show that seemed to value people who look like me. Like our dear friend Kristen Bell, it'd be different if Barstool or Outkick wasn't hiring black people. That makes sense. I mean, Jason Whitlock can only work one place at a time. But Meadowlark Media? The Dan Lebatard Show? I have trouble wrapping my head around it. It raises the same red flag in my mind where I'm like, so do they not value black talent, or does black talent not value them? Which is bad either way. I mean, compared to them, I'm barely a grain of sand in the sports media universe. And the show itself has been a thing for 19 years compared to my year and a half. But I already have a list of black talent, particularly black women, I want to work with. Imagine if I had the budget to hire them. So why doesn't Meadowlark? And look, it's easy to play armchair quarterback in situations like this, and I obviously don't know their plans, but I'd have a whole pipeline development program just for underrepresented talent if I were them. I mean, I already have the general framework for one myself as I grow this, so when I'm sitting back looking at all the resources they have, I'm salivating at what I could do with all of that, which again is easy to do when you're on the outside looking in, but it is doable no matter what, especially as this industry is in the middle of such drastic changes right now. Moving away from my feelings being hurt, it also helped their content out tremendously. One thing they have done differently since leaving ESPN is lean even more into discussing societal issues. But when it comes to issues concerning the black community, they have fallen short a lot of the time. They just don't have anybody regularly providing those perspectives. Whether it's John Moran, hip hop culture and guns, Dion leaving an HBCU, or Angel Reese taunting Caitlin Clark, even when they do have what I would call the correct take, they aren't able to go in depth with it. What's worse is when they don't have the quote unquote correct take or miss the mark completely, there's nobody there to provide any pushback. Our buddy Kristen Bell learned this, or should have learned this, herself. I told you she wrote a children's book about accepting people who are different than you. The name of that book is The World Needs More Purple People if you're interested in checking it out, but you shouldn't be because it missed the mark big time. It attempts to convince children to overcome political and ideological differences to get along better, which, okay, whatever, but it does so using the concept of red, blue, and purple people and how these people overcome their differences by ignoring color. If you've ever cringed when someone has said, "I don't even see color," you understand the problem with this. Promoting people being colorblind in terms of race strips the identity away of non-white people and is also wildly ineffective at solving racism. If Kristen had used all the time she saved by not showering to get to know more black people and ran her idea for a book by some of them before publishing it, perhaps she could have saved herself the embarrassment or maybe even come up with an actual helpful idea for a children's book, like "You're actually the last person to smell yourself, go ahead and hop in the shower," or something like that. When I hear the Lebatard Show poorly discuss these topics, it makes me want to listen less. And I'm not the only one because I'll see comments about it as well. It's especially important for them to discuss these topics well because if you're a white, socially conscious sports fan, the Lebatard Show is where you're going to learn about these issues. They consider them an authority on these things, whether they're correct or not. In those same comment sections, I'll see comments echoing the show's sentiments on things because they trust the show. If you hear something from a source you trust, how often do you go verify it? Rarely. So-and-so said this, they've been right about these other things, so I'm willing to bet they're right about this thing. Then I have to run into these people in real life and they make my life harder because they don't know any better. But I don't just want them to hire a black person to educate white people. That sounds terrible. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. I would certainly welcome the different perspective and I would hope it would challenge members of the show to educate themselves more on certain matters. But I'd also like to see more black people because we're hilarious. For a show that relies so much on humor, I don't see how they don't understand that you cannot attain maximum funny without black people. It's simply not possible. It's crazy to me that they don't see this because whenever they do let Juju get on the mic, he's easily their funniest and most charismatic member. A big part of the appeal of the show is you feel like you're in on an inside joke. You're part of this big community. But it's hard to buy all the way into that if they're only using certain humor lanes. I'm not saying the show has to be everything to everybody, but I do think it could offer something to everybody, and I don't think that's too much to ask. I also worry that the longer it takes and the more I see people comment on how they should probably hire more black people, how is it going to affect whoever they do bring aboard? It's no secret that whenever you're in the other box, you're going to be questioned about whether or not you're qualified to be wherever you are. We've seen it with the women they've hired. It's how this society is. It's even worse when you're black, especially when you're a black woman. The longer it takes to hire someone, the more it's going to look like they're just hiring them to shut everyone up. And whoever is hired is going to be the one who feels the blowback. They're the ones who the comments will be directed at. They're the ones who are going to be met with skepticism, which is already going to happen, but more so if it feels like a "here, damn" hire. It's like if Kristen Bell posts a picture of her next dinner party and I'm there. Nobody will be like, "Oh, Brandon is good friends with Kristen Bell. Good for him." Everyone will be like, "Oh, wow, they have him there just to check a box. I bet he doesn't even like casserole." I mean, I don't, but you get the point. Now, this isn't about Kristen Bell's dinner party because I couldn't care less who went there. This isn't about thinking the white women the show hired are bad at their jobs or anybody that the show hired is bad at their job. This isn't me thinking Dan's racist or me wanting a job, although that'd be nice. At the end of the day, this is about wanting to enjoy a show that I have loved and respected. I get the show. I want to feel like the show gets me. Because I'm a fan, I want to continue being a fan. Hell, I want to become an even bigger fan. It feels like we're in this weird point in society where any criticism automatically makes you a hater. It feels uncomfortable. I could have done an episode 3 times as long as this one about a show I hate, and it would have been a breeze. But even though it's hard, it's important to do it about a show I love because accountability can be a product of love. I think it works best when it is. If you care about something or someone and see that it's falling short in an important way, then you should point it out. It doesn't mean they have to accept it or immediately change or not get their feelings hurt. Criticism stings. I know y'all think I'm perfect, and you're mostly right, but I was recently on the receiving end of some constructive criticism, and I certainly felt some type of way about it initially. But the critique was spot on. It was great information, and I'm better now that I know about it, and I'm thankful someone cared enough about me and thought enough of me to say, hey, you could be doing better here, instead of just letting me wander aimlessly. So I'm hoping this is received in that same kind of spirit. Most importantly, diversity of all types is fantastic. Race, gender, sexual orientation, education level, socioeconomic status, whatever. Surround yourself with all kinds of people because you'll be better for it. Except bigots. Fuck them. All right, I have successfully sweated through my shirt. Time for me to go shower. This has been another episode of Beyond the Arc with Brandon Silvers. Thank you for liking, subscribing, rating, reviewing, and sharing, and I will catch you next week.